the quiet before the storm. The studio lights burned softly against the velvet curtain as Sandra Bullock walked in, her calm smile hiding something deeper. Years had passed since she last stood on a stage beside Keanu Reeves. The cameras were already waiting, the crowd's whispers blending with the electric hum of anticipation. It wasn't just another Hollywood reunion. It was the night that would uncover everything they had buried beneath silence and time. Keanu stood backstage, his hands folded loosely, his gaze distant yet steady. His voice coach had once told him that silence could say more than words, and tonight, that silence felt heavier than ever. He had seen Sandra's message earlier that morning, the one that simply said, "We should finally talk." As the host introduced them, the lights dimmed, and the audience leaned forward. The words, "Hollywood Legends Reunited," flashed on the giant screen, followed by their faces. The applause was warm, but behind it lived curiosity, rumors of a hidden story, of an old wound between them that had never truly healed. They walked in from opposite sides, their eyes meeting under the golden spotlight. A small, polite smile crossed Sandra's face, and Keanu nodded back, his calm expression unreadable. The host began the conversation lightly, asking about their first movie together, about the laughter on set, the energy they once shared. Sandra answered with grace, her voice steady, but her eyes told another story, of exhaustion, of something unsaid. Keanu's silence between answers wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, controlled, as if every word was being weighed carefully before release. The audience laughed when Sandra joked about how she used to spill coffee on the script and blame the assistants. Keanu smiled faintly, but his mind drifted elsewhere, to a night 20 years ago, when Sandra had called him from a lonely trailer, her voice trembling as she said she didn't want fame to swallow who they were. He had promised her then that he would never change. Now, looking at her under the bright stage lights, he wondered if he had broken that promise. The interview shifted. The host, a sharp-tongued journalist known for his daring questions, decided to cross the invisible line between curiosity and cruelty. "People have said," the reporter began slowly, "that what happened between you two wasn't just friendship. Some say there was a falling out, something that changed both your careers. Is that true?" The room grew still. Sandra's fingers tightened on the microphone. Keanu's jaw flexed once, a subtle sign only people who truly knew him would catch. Sandra spoke first. "People say a lot of things," she said gently, "but not everything that's true needs to be explained." Her answer was elegant, but the host pressed again, smiling as though he smelled blood. "So there was something?" he asked, leaning forward. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing discomfort. The producers in the booth exchanged uneasy glances. "The question wasn't planned." Keanu leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "Sometimes," he said, "people look for stories where they don't exist. And sometimes they ignore the ones that really matter." The room went silent. His tone wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of something deeper. Years of restraint, patience, and quiet integrity. The host tried to laugh it off, but the moment had changed the air. Sandra turned slightly toward Keanu, her expression softening for the first time that evening. It was as if the unspoken understanding between them had resurfaced, the one that had built their bond so many years ago. But then, without warning, the host turned the conversation again, this time toward something darker. "There was a rumor," he said, "that Sandra had once walked off a film set because of how she was treated by a director. Keanu, were you involved in that situation?" The question landed like a blade. The room froze. Sandra's smile vanished. Keanu's hand lowered slowly to his lap. He didn't move, but the silence he held was louder than any word could be. The host tried to continue. "Many people said you were there, that you—" "Enough," Keanu said quietly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The word carried a calm force that cut through the noise like glass through water. The audience fell utterly silent. Cameras caught the flicker in his eyes, a mixture of sadness, anger, and something protective. Sandra turned toward him, her throat tight. She hadn't expected him to step in. No one did. For a second, it felt like the world had forgotten its breath. The host blinked, stunned. I was just asking what everyone wanted to know," he stammered. Keanu leaned forward again, his eyes locked on the man. Some questions, he said slowly, are not asked out of curiosity. They're asked to hurt, and that's not journalism. That's cruelty. His tone remained gentle, but each word felt deliberate, carved from truth itself. The entire audience seemed to lean in closer, mesmerized by the calm strength in his voice. Sandra's eyes glistened. She looked down for a moment, trying to hold herself together. She had carried the weight of that story for years, never speaking about the humiliation, the manipulation, the night she almost quit acting altogether. Keanu had been the only one who knew. He had found her sitting alone, crying quietly in her trailer, her contract torn in half beside her. He had stayed with her until dawn, saying only one thing that she never forgot: "You don't walk away because of them. You walk through them." Now, hearing him defend her again in front of hundreds of people, her walls began to tremble. The host cleared his throat, fumbling to change the subject. "Well, moving on, let's talk about your upcoming project together." But no one moved on. The energy had shifted entirely. Keanu sat quietly again, his calm presence filling the space where anger could have lived. Sandra exhaled softly, blinking away what threatened to become tears. The audience, unsure of whether to applaud, simply sat in reverent silence. Even the cameras zoomed in without direction, capturing the rawness of the moment, the quiet defiance of kindness against cruelty. After a long pause, Sandra smiled faintly and said, "That's why I trust him. He never speaks to impress. He speaks to protect." Keanu looked at her, and for the first time that night, a genuine smile flickered across his face. "You've always been worth protecting," he replied softly. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, not the wild kind of cheering reserved for gossip, but the respectful sound that follows truth revealed in its purest form. Yet beneath the warmth of that moment, something darker lingered. Behind the stage, a figure stood watching, a former director whose name had disappeared from the headlines years ago. He had not forgotten the night Sandra walked away from his film, nor the man who had made her strong enough to do it. As Keanu and Sandra left the stage, the man smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Let's see how long kindness survives when the past starts to speak again." And that was how it began. The story no one expected to unfold again, a story built on respect, betrayal, and the power of words that could silence even the loudest lies. The storm that followed, the night after the interview, Hollywood couldn't stop talking. Every social feed, every late-night segment, every entertainment headline replayed that single moment. Keanu's quiet defense of Sandra Bullock. People called it the most powerful silence ever caught on camera. Others said it was proof of what humanity and fame should look like. But to those who had known the truth behind that silence, it was a spark that could ignite everything they had worked to bury. Keanu sat alone in his hotel suite, the city lights stretching endlessly outside his window. The phone on the table vibrated every few seconds. Calls, messages, interview requests, but he didn't pick it up. His mind replayed the look on Sandra's face when he had spoken. It wasn't gratitude. It was relief, and something more fragile. Something that made him feel both protective and afraid. He walked to the balcony, feeling the cold air cut through the quiet. The city below glittered with life, yet it all felt distant. Fame had a strange way of amplifying silence and distorting truth. For years, he had stayed out of gossip, out of spectacle. Now his calm moment had become a storm. His phone buzzed again, this time with a familiar name. It was Sandra. He hesitated for a second before answering. Her voice came softly through the line. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "I know," she said, pausing, "but I wanted to." There was a long silence between them, the kind of silence that used to feel comfortable when they were younger. Now it felt heavy, charged with the weight of years unspoken. "They're calling it the moment of truth," Sandra said quietly. "They think we planned it," Keanu sighed. "Let them think what they want. That's the thing," she said. "People don't stop at thinking. They start digging." He looked out over the city. "Then let them dig. We've got nothing to hide." Her breath trembled faintly through the receiver. "You do remember who was in that room back then, right?" He did. too well. The memory was sharp. The night she had been humiliated on set. The shouting, the cameras being turned off, the crew looking away while the director's temper burned through the walls. Keanu had stepped between them that night, his voice calm but his eyes fierce. He had walked her out of that building, his arm shielding her from the chaos behind them, and though she had survived it, the man who caused it never forgot the humiliation of being challenged by someone who refused to play by Hollywood's cruel rules. Keanu closed his eyes and exhaled. "Yeah," he said. "I remember." The next morning, every news outlet carried the same headline. Keanu Reeves defends Sandra Bullock from invasive question. Hollywood reacts. Producers called it heroic. Directors called it risky. Publicists called it dangerous. Hollywood didn't like truth when it came wrapped in dignity. It liked chaos, noise, and scandal. Sandra's team flooded her with requests, statements, interviews, exclusive tell-all offers, but she said no to every one of them. Her assistant, Claire, tried to convince her otherwise. "This could be good for you," Claire said. "People love you again. Your numbers are spiking and everyone's calling you an icon of grace." Sandra smiled faintly. "Grace isn't a campaign," she said. "It's what you try to hold on to when no one's watching." Claire sighed. "You and Keanu are going viral. Don't you want to control the narrative?" "If it's real," Sandra said, "it doesn't need control." She turned away, looking out of the wide glass window at the morning sun cutting through Los Angeles haze. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined Keanu standing the same way, quiet, composed, untouched by the noise. That thought alone gave her strength. But the world wasn't going to let it rest. 3 days later, Keanu received a message from his agent, Thomas. "We need to talk, now." They met at a small cafe in Beverly Hills, one of the few places that still offered privacy. Thomas looked uneasy, glancing around before he spoke. "You've started something, man," he said. "That interview, it's everywhere. But it's not just trending. Someone's trying to twist it." Keanu frowned. "How?" "There's an old producer talking to gossip sites. Says you and Sandra covered something up years ago, that you were involved in her walking off that movie set." Keanu stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the table. "They're saying the director you confronted is back," Thomas continued. "He's been trying to sell his side of the story. And it's ugly." Keanu looked up slowly. "His side?" "He's claiming he never did anything wrong. That you two tried to ruin his career because he rejected her." Keanu's expression didn't change, but his silence sharpened. "I know it's all lies," Thomas said quickly. "But in this business, lies sell faster than truth. I just need to know what you want to do." Keanu leaned back, his voice calm. "Nothing." "Nothing?" Thomas asked, shocked. "Keanu, you can't stay silent this time. People need to hear your side." Keanu shook his head. "They don't need to hear my side. They need to see my actions. That's enough." Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're impossible, but fine. If that's what you want." Later that evening, Sandra was sitting in her kitchen when her phone rang again. It was her old friend Olivia, one of the few who had been there when everything fell apart all those years ago. "You saw the articles?" Olivia asked. "Yes," Sandra said softly. "They're trying to rewrite history." "You can't let them," Olivia said. "You need to speak up." "And say what?" "That I was humiliated by a man who thought he owned the world. That I almost quit because of him. No one wants to hear that. They just want entertainment." "Then give them truth instead of entertainment," Olivia replied. "It's harder to digest, but it lasts longer." Sandra didn't reply. She stared at the old script on her table, the one from the movie she had walked away from years ago. Keanu's handwriting still marked the edges of the pages. Small notes, words of encouragement. One line in blue ink read, "You're stronger when you don't prove it." She smiled faintly and whispered, "You were right." Meanwhile, deep in a production office on Sunset Boulevard, the man behind the storm watched the headlines unfold with a smirk. Richard Hale, the director who had once screamed at Sandra until she broke. He had disappeared after that scandal, blaming creative differences, hiding behind a few art house projects that no one watched. But now, after Keanu's public defense, the attention he had long craved was within reach again. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and looked at the headlines glowing on his laptop screen. "They remember you now," his assistant said. "Not yet," Richard replied. "But they will. What are you planning?" He smiled faintly. "A documentary, my story. How Hollywood turned on me because of a lie. And I'm going to make sure their names are in it." The assistant hesitated. That could backfire. Richard's eyes darkened. "It's not about truth. It's about power." And they took mine. The following week, Sandra and Keanu were scheduled to appear at a charity gala together, a long-planned event supporting young filmmakers. Both considered canceling, but neither wanted the other to face the press alone. When Sandra arrived, flashes erupted instantly. Questions poured in like rain. "Sandra, is it true you and Keanu are finally confirming what happened on that set? Sandra, is it a romantic connection or just friendship? Did Keanu save your career?" She kept walking, calm and poised, her smile controlled but kind. Her silence said more than any quote could. A few moments later, Keanu arrived. Dressed simply in black, he walked through the chaos as though it didn't exist. When they met near the red carpet's end, they exchanged a quiet nod, a shared understanding that no noise could shake. Once inside, away from cameras, Sandra whispered, "They won't stop until someone tells them what they want to hear." "Then let them get tired," Keanu replied softly. For a moment, she looked at him and the room around them disappeared. There was something unshakable about his calmness, as if he carried peace inside him that no chaos could touch. But peace never lasts long in a world built on noise. Just as the gala began, an assistant rushed to their table holding a phone. She whispered to Sandra, her voice trembling, "It's out, the documentary trailer. They released it early." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What documentary?" Sandra's face went pale. "His story," she said quietly. "Richard's," on the screen across the hall. The big display meant for charity clips suddenly flickered, and instead, the first images of the documentary began to play. Grainy behind-the-scenes footage appeared, showing Sandra walking away from the set, Keanu following her. Then came a voiceover, smooth and poisonous. "They said I was cruel," Richard's voice echoed. "But they never told the truth. The truth is, they destroyed me to protect their secret." The room fell into stunned silence. Sandra froze, her heart pounding. Keanu's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. The host of the gala ran to cut the feed, but it was too late. The headlines had already started to spread again, this time darker, sharper, hungrier. People were whispering, eyes darting between Keanu and Sandra as if they were watching a scandal unfold in real time. Sandra turned toward Keanu, her voice low but shaking. "He's trying to rewrite everything." Keanu stood slowly, his calm composure returning like armor. "Then we'll remind them what truth looks like." Sandra looked up at him, uncertain. "How?" He turned his gaze toward the silent crowd, then back to her. "By saying nothing but standing for everything." And in that moment, with the noise rising again outside, something unspoken formed between them, an alliance of dignity against destruction, of kindness against cruelty. But neither of them knew what Richard had already planned next, something that would turn silence itself into a weapon and test whether kindness could truly survive in a world that thrived on its ruin. The silence that broke the city the next morning. The city awoke to a storm disguised as news. Every major network carried the same headline. "The truth behind the Keanu and Sandra story. Director speaks out." But it wasn't truth. It was performance, perfectly staged, expertly edited, and cruelly timed. Richard Hale's documentary clip had gone viral overnight. Millions watched the grainy footage of Sandra walking off the set and Keanu following her, edited to make it look like scandal rather than protection. The narration twisted reality into poison. "They say he defended her," Richard's voice said in the trailer. "But people forget that protection can hide guilt, too." The footage cut to an old press photo of Keanu and Sandra smiling together, as if the world couldn't tell the difference between friendship and conspiracy. By sunrise, news vans had parked outside both their homes. Microphones reached over fences. Voices shouted questions through gates. and drones hovered above rooftops like mechanical vultures waiting for movement. Inside her house, Sandra sat by the window with a mug of cold coffee. Her phone lay face down, still vibrating every few seconds. She hadn't slept. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but her chest burned with the same feeling she'd carried all those years ago, the one that made her want to disappear when Hollywood became cruel. Her friend Olivia came by without warning, pushing through the security gate and entering the house quietly. "They're going too far," Olivia said. "You can't ignore this one." "I've ignored worse," Sandra whispered, not looking up. "Not like this. This isn't gossip. This is rewriting your life." Sandra turned from the window, her eyes soft but weary. "And what do I do, Liv? Go on TV and tell them the truth? Tell them I was broken and that a man helped me stand again? That's not a headline. They'll twist it too." Olivia stepped closer. "Maybe, but silence lets them write for you." Sandra didn't respond. Instead, she opened a drawer and took out an old photograph, one from that set. She and Keanu were sitting on the curb outside the studio. Her makeup was smudged from crying, and his arm rested around her shoulders, his eyes fixed somewhere in the distance, calm and protective. The moment had been real, unplanned, and entirely human, and now the world was trying to turn it into something dirty. "He doesn't deserve this," she said softly. He spoke with dignity. "And now they'll punish him for it." In another part of the city, Keanu's morning was no quieter. He had refused all interviews, all offers to clarify his side. His publicist was losing patience. "You can't stay silent forever," she said. "The internet moves fast, but this story's not dying. Every talk show wants you on air." Keanu looked out the window of the studio, where rain had started to fall across the glass. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how the truth never has sponsors?" She sighed. "Keanu, please. This isn't philosophy. This is damage control." "That's exactly the problem," he said. "Truth isn't damage, and silence isn't guilt." Before she could argue, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice he hadn't heard in years spoke from the other side, slow, deliberate, and tainted with satisfaction. "You always had the world's sympathy," Richard Hale said. "Let's see how long it lasts when people see what you really protect." Keanu's hand tightened on the phone. "You don't have to do this, don't I?" Richard replied. "You took my career from me." "No," Keanu said softly. "You destroyed it yourself." "We'll see," Richard said. "They always believe the one who speaks last." The line went dead. Keanu stood still for a long moment. Then he placed the phone down, took a deep breath, and walked outside. By noon, social media had turned into a battlefield. Half the internet defended Keanu and Sandra, posting clips of his quiet defiance, quoting his words like they were scripture. The other half dissected every image, every old interview, every smile between them, searching for hidden meaning. Hashtags like Hata Keanules and As Stand With Sandra trended side by side. The world no longer cared about truth. It cared about sides, and that's when the producers of a popular talk show made their move. They invited both Keanu and Sandra to appear together for what they called the real story. Sandra refused. Keanu didn't even respond, but the invitation didn't go unanswered. That evening, a short anonymous video appeared online. It showed a woman, voice distorted, claiming to have worked on the set all those years ago. She said she had seen everything. She claimed Keanu had threatened the director that he was the reason Sandra left. It was a lie, but it was enough to make the storm grow darker. When Sandra saw the clip, she broke the one rule she'd made for herself. She called Keanu at midnight. He answered instantly. "Did you see it?" she asked. "Yeah. They're lying about you." "About us." "I know." She hesitated, her voice shaking slightly. "Keanu, what if silence isn't enough anymore?" He paused before replying. "Silence isn't weakness. It's focus. We wait. And when we speak, we make it count." "You sound like you're planning something," she said softly. "I am," he said, "but not a statement. A mirror. A mirror. Truth doesn't need to fight," he said. "It just needs to be seen clearly." Before she could ask what he meant, he hung up. 2 days later, a message began circulating among journalists. A small screening invitation, unmarked by any studio, simply titled, "Behind the Curtain, One Night Only." It promised a private showing of unreleased footage from a film long forgotten. No one knew who sent it, but the rumor spread fast. Some thought it was a leaked piece of Richard Hale's documentary. Others thought it was a counterstrike from Keanu himself. Sandra heard about it from her assistant, who burst into her house holding a printed invite. "They're saying it's you two," she said breathlessly. "It's happening tomorrow night," Sandra frowned. "We didn't authorize anything." "I know," Claire said, "but they're calling it a truth reel. Only 30 seats. Everyone's trying to get in." Sandra felt her heartbeat quicken. Then someone's about to end this, for better or worse. That night, Keanu met Thomas, his agent, at a small art theater downtown. The place was empty except for a single technician and a flickering projector. "Please tell me this isn't your doing," Thomas said. Keanu didn't answer. "What is this?" Keanu looked at the old film reel on the table. "It's what they forgot to show." Thomas blinked. "You kept footage from that night?" "No," Keanu said. "A cameraman did. He reached out last week. Said he couldn't watch Richard Twisted anymore. And what's on it? The truth." The following evening, the small theater filled with journalists, producers, and a few faces from the past. Sandra arrived quietly, wearing a simple black dress. Keanu was already there, sitting in the back row. No one knew what to expect. The lights dimmed, and the reel began to play. The footage was raw, unedited, shaky, but real. It showed the set that night. Richard's voice shouting, Sandra standing still trying to respond. Then Keanu stepping forward, calm but firm, telling him to stop. "You don't talk to people like that," his voice said. "Not to her. Not to anyone." The camera caught Richard grabbing Sandra's arm and Keanu pulling him away, placing himself between them. The crew looked frozen. The clip ended with Sandra walking out, Keanu following behind her, whispering something inaudible as she wiped her tears. Then the screen faded to black, and words appeared. "Some stories don't need a script. They just need witnesses." The room was silent. No one moved. Even the reporters forgot to record for a moment. Then Sandra spoke softly into the quiet. "That's what happened. No more, no less." Keanu stood, his voice low but steady. "And this is why silence matters. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it waits." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was slow, respectful, and human. But in the shadows near the exit, Richard Hale was watching. His plan had collapsed, his story exposed. Yet the look on his face wasn't defeat. It was something else. A cold calculation. He leaned toward his assistant and whispered, "If truth can break silence, then let's see what happens when silence breaks them." The next morning, he disappeared. No one could find him. And within 48 hours, new footage appeared online. Unmarked, unnamed, and deeply personal. This time, it wasn't from the set. It was from years later, a private moment caught on a phone camera. Keanu and Sandra, sitting together in a quiet park, laughing softly. Unaware they were being filmed, the clip was harmless. Beautiful even, but in the hands of those hungry for scandal, it would become something else entirely. The storm wasn't over. It was only changing shape, and for the first time, Keanu and Sandra realized that truth alone might not be enough to stop what was coming next. The betrayal behind the curtain. The next 48 hours felt endless. The leaked park video had spread everywhere. On the surface, it showed nothing wrong, just two friends sitting on a bench, laughing under the warm glow of afternoon light. But the internet had a way of poisoning innocence. People slowed the footage down, zoomed in, and invented meanings that weren't there. They were holding hands. "Look," one voice said online. "It proves they lied all along," another wrote. Comment after comment turned affection into conspiracy and laughter into evidence. Sandra watched it play on her phone in the dark of her bedroom. She hadn't eaten all day. Her face glowed from the blue light, her hands trembling slightly. The world had taken something pure and turned it into something hollow. She thought about calling Keanu again, but she stopped herself. She didn't want her voice to sound weak. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "You trusted the wrong person." The words made her heart tighten. She looked around the room instinctively, as if the sender might be hiding in the shadows. She forwarded the message to her assistant Claire, who called back immediately. "Who sent that?" Claire asked. "No idea," Sandra whispered. "But I think we've been watched for a long time." At the same time, across town, Keanu sat in his garage, surrounded by stillness. His motorcycle leaned against the wall, half covered in dust. A faint smell of oil and rain filled the air. He'd been avoiding the internet completely, but even silence couldn't protect him forever. His friend and longtime manager Thomas arrived unannounced again. "We have a problem," Thomas said. "Just one?" Keanu replied quietly. Thomas dropped a folder on the workbench. Inside were screenshots, emails, production notes, and payment records. "Someone close leaked the park video. Not paparazzi. Someone from your circle." Keanu's eyes scanned the papers slowly. "Who?" Thomas hesitated. "One of your assistants. Apparently, they sold the clip to Hale's team a month ago." Keanu closed the folder, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Money, access, fame, the usual poison," Thomas said bitterly. "But here's the real twist. Hale's not gone. He's still feeding stories through smaller blogs. He's building something bigger." Keanu exhaled softly. "He's not trying to win. He's trying to drain." Thomas frowned. "Drain what?" "The soul of the story," Keanu said. "That's what people like him do. They make pain feel entertaining." Meanwhile, Sandra received a message from a journalist named Lena Torres. Lena had been one of the few reporters who still believed in quiet truth. Her message read, "There's something you should see. Meet me tonight." "No cameras," Sandra agreed. They met at a small cafe tucked between old bookstores. Lena looked tired, as if she hadn't slept for days. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photos, behind-the-scenes shots from the documentary editing room. One image froze Sandra's breath. It showed Richard Hale sitting beside a young man wearing headphones. Her assistant, Claire's younger brother. "He's been helping him," Lena said. "They've been tracking your public moves for months. Every outing, every call." Sandra felt her stomach drop. "Claire didn't know?" "I don't think so," Lena said. "But Hale's not after a story anymore. He's after humiliation." Sandra looked out the window, watching rain begin to fall again. Then he's about to learn that dignity doesn't drown easily. The next day, Sandra arrived unannounced at Keanu's house. She rarely visited him in person anymore, but this time, she needed to look him in the eye. He opened the door, calm as always, though his face showed the fatigue of someone who hadn't rested in days. "We were betrayed," she said. "I know," he replied. "Thomas found the same thing." She stepped inside. "It's not just a leak. Hale's still alive in this. He's building something new. He's trying to release a feature-length version of that fake documentary." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then it's time to take away his stage." Sandra frowned. "How?" He pointed to a box on the table. "Truth, Part 2. Inside were tapes, old interviews, raw behind-the-scenes recordings from their earliest films together. Not for publicity, not for promotion. Just moments of authenticity. "Laughter, mistakes, kindness, respect. You kept all this?" she asked softly. "I didn't," he said. "A fan did. They sent them to me anonymously last week." Sandra looked at the tapes again. "This could show people who we really are." "Only if we tell it our way," Keanu said. "No networks, no sponsors, no profit. Just release it free everywhere." Sandra hesitated. "You think the truth can survive online?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but it can still breathe." A week later, they filmed a simple video together. No studio lights, no makeup. Just 2 chairs in a quiet room. Sandra wore jeans and a plain shirt. Keanu wore black, as always. The video began with her speaking. Her voice was steady, calm. "People have told our story for years," she said, "but they've told it through noise. We're here to remind you that kindness doesn't need defense, and truth doesn't need volume." Keanu looked at her, then turned to the camera. "When you stand for someone," he said, "you don't do it for praise. You do it because silence can be violence too. They didn't mention names. They didn't accuse anyone. They just spoke about respect, compassion, and the cost of empathy in a world built on spectacle. The video was released quietly. No press release, no announcement. Within 24 hours, it reached millions. People began to notice something unusual. Instead of controversy, there was calm. Instead of anger, there was reflection. Comment sections filled with gratitude instead of gossip. Someone wrote, "This isn't a video. It's a reminder that fame doesn't erase humanity." Another said, "They turned pain into poetry." For the first time in weeks, the noise began to fade, but not for everyone. In a small studio apartment on the edge of Los Angeles, Richard Hale sat in darkness watching the video play on repeat. His eyes were hollow, his expression twisted with disbelief. His assistant had left him days ago. His sponsors had pulled funding. The world had stopped listening to him. He smashed his glass against the wall and shouted, "They took my ending!" His laptop blinked with a new email notification. It was unsigned, sent from a private server. The message read, "There's more footage. The kind that ends careers. Want it?" Richard stared at the screen. "Who are you?" He typed. No answer came, just another message. "Meet me tomorrow. Same cafe where she met Lena Torres." He smiled faintly. "So it's still alive," he whispered. "The story isn't over." Meanwhile, Sandra felt peace for the first time in weeks. She sat in her garden at dusk, the sky glowing gold and violet. Keanu had texted earlier, just 3 words. "We did right?" She replied, "Always will." But before she could put her phone down, another message appeared. An unknown number again. The footage they never showed could destroy him. "Do you want to see it?" Her breath caught. The past, it seemed, wasn't done haunting them. And somewhere across the city, as the first stars appeared over the horizon, Keanu looked up from his empty garage, sensing that silence was shifting again. Not ending, just waiting because some storms don't fade. They circle back to test how strong calmness really is. And the calm was about to be tested once more. The truth that refused to die the night was quiet in Los Angeles, but not peaceful. Inside Sandra's house, the message on her phone still glowed against the dark. The footage they never showed could destroy him. "Do you want to see it?" She read it again and again, her heartbeat matching the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. The world outside slept, but her thoughts didn't. She had promised herself she would never let fear dictate her choices again. But this felt different. It wasn't fear. It was dread. She stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Who is this?" No answer. She waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. The silence itself began to feel alive, like someone was watching from behind the shadows. She placed her phone face down, trying to calm her mind. But every sound in the house, the creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, felt louder than usual. Finally, unable to take it anymore, "She called Keanu!" He answered instantly, his tone calm as always. "You got it too?" She froze. "You mean, the message," he said. "I received it an hour ago." She closed her eyes. "What do they want from us now?" "The same thing people like that always want," he replied quietly. Reaction. She could hear movement in the background. Footsteps, the sound of a door closing. "Where are you?" she asked. "Driving," he said. "And I'm coming to you." It was nearly 1 in the morning when his car pulled into her driveway. He walked in without knocking. The air between them was heavy but familiar, the same kind of silence they had once shared years ago on that movie set when everything first began to break. She handed him the phone, showing the message. "They're saying there's footage, something that could destroy you." He read it once, then looked up. "There's always footage. That's how lies survive now. What if it's real?" she asked quietly. "What if they found something old, something taken out of context?" "Then we'll face it," he said simply. "Truth doesn't fear exposure." "But people do," she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window and stared at the faint reflection of city lights in the glass. When you live long enough in the spotlight, you learn that truth isn't the opposite of lies. It's the patience to outlast them. Sandra sat down slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. You always sound so calm when everything's burning. He turned to her with a faint smile. Because panic doesn't put out fires. The next day, a private investigator hired by Thomas called with an update. He had traced the anonymous messages to an unregistered number bouncing through multiple servers. But one thing stood out. A digital fingerprint connected to Richard Hale's email network. He's not alone, the investigator said. Someone's helping him, someone who knows how to cover tracks. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about control. Keanu thanked him and hung up. His mind was already racing through possibilities. He knew Hale's arrogance wouldn't let him stay quiet. There was still one piece missing, a motive stronger than bitterness. Meanwhile, Sandra met with Lena Torres again. The journalist had been digging deeper and had uncovered something disturbing. Hale has investors, Lena said. A group trying to launch a streaming platform for raw celebrity footage. Truth without filters, they call it. They're using your story as the first case study. Sandra felt sick. So this was never personal. It's business, Lena shook her head. It's both. He hates what you represent, grace, dignity. He wants to prove that everyone breaks eventually. That night, Keanu and Sandra met at a small cabin outside the city. His quiet escape from the world. No press, no cameras, just silence and the faint crackle of fire. They sat across from each other at a wooden table, papers and screenshots spread out like pieces of a broken puzzle. If he wants to release more footage, we have two options, Keanu said. Ignore him, or take the narrative away completely. How do you take something away from someone who feeds on chaos? She asked. By giving him nothing to feed on, he replied. No anger, no denial, no defense. Just presence? Sandra frowned slightly. Presence? Yes, he said. We show up, together, not to explain, not to justify. Just to exist in truth, no matter what he releases. You mean go public again? He nodded. But this time, not as an interview. As a conversation. Real, unfiltered, human. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. Truth usually is, he said. People just complicate it when they're afraid of it. The next morning, the world woke up to an announcement from both their official channels. Live conversation. Tonight at 8 p.m. No network. No moderators. No sponsors. Just them. The countdown began, and millions of viewers waited. Journalists called it risky. Some called it desperate. But others called it revolutionary. As the stream went live, the image appeared. Keanu and Sandra sitting in a dimly lit studio. The same quiet energy that had once silenced a room now reaching millions of screens. Sandra spoke first. Her tone was calm, not rehearsed. They say truth sets you free, but before it does, it breaks you. And we've been broken enough times to understand that peace isn't about silence. It's about self-respect. Keanu nodded, his voice low and steady. We've learned that the loudest people aren't always right. Sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that carry the real story. There was no script, no dramatic music. They talked about resilience, forgiveness, and the pressure of being human under endless observation. Then, Sandra said something that caught even Keanu off guard. The night he defended me on stage wasn't the first time, she said softly. Years ago, when I was being humiliated on set, he stood up for me. Not because of fame, not because it helped him, but because kindness doesn't ask permission. The comment section exploded with emotion. People wrote about empathy, about courage, about the power of standing up quietly. Hashtags turned from scandal to solidarity. By the time the stream ended, it had been watched by over 50 million people, and just as the screen faded to black, a new message appeared on social media from an anonymous account tied to Hale's circle. They're lying again. The final proof drops tomorrow. That night, Hale sat in a motel room surrounded by monitors, his face illuminated by the cold light of screens. He had one last video, a cut he had kept hidden for years. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't even incriminating. But it could be twisted. And he knew the world would believe whatever he told them to. He smiled to himself, whispering, Tomorrow, we end the myth. But what he didn't know was that someone had already turned against him. His assistant, nervous, pale and tired of being part of something cruel, had contacted Lena Torres. He sent her everything: the files, the messages, the fake edits, the fabricated voiceovers, every manipulation, every lie. The next morning, as the world waited for Hale's proof, Lena's article dropped first. The truth behind the lies. Leaked evidence exposes fabricated videos and manipulated audio used to defame Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. It spread faster than any rumor ever could. Screenshots, timelines, receipts, all laid bare. The narrative flipped overnight. Hale's name became synonymous with deceit. His investors withdrew, his platform crumbled, and his reputation turned to dust. Sandra read the article in disbelief. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not a polite smile for cameras, but a real, quiet smile. She called Keanu. "It's over," she said softly. On the other end, his voice carried the calm of final closure. "No," he said, "it's beginning again, but on our terms this time." That evening, the two of them met one last time at the same small stage where everything had started, the talk show set that once held so much tension. The crew had changed, but the air still carried the memory of that moment years ago when Keanu had spoken those unforgettable words. As they sat under the dim lights, Sandra looked at him and said, "You know what I've realized?" "What?" he asked. "That dignity isn't silence. It's choosing peace when the world demands noise." Keanu smiled gently. "And peace isn't weakness. It's the power to walk through fire without becoming it." The cameras weren't rolling. There was no audience this time. Just two people who had survived the noise, finding stillness again. And as they stood to leave, Sandra turned back one last time to the empty chairs on the stage and whispered, "Thank you for defending what the world forgot to protect." Keanu looked at her, the faintest light in his eyes. "We didn't defend it," he said softly. "We reminded it how to exist." But even as they walked out into the quiet night, the world was already writing its next story. Whispers began to circulate about Hale's disappearance, about hidden investors, about unfinished footage. Sandra glanced up at the stars and said, "It never really ends, does it?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't end. It just waits for the next person brave enough to tell it." And as they walked away, the faint hum of cameras in the distance reminded them that peace is never permanent. But sometimes, even a moment of it is worth the entire storm. When silence became legacy, the world had finally quieted. But silence, as Sandra Bullock had learned, was never just silence, it was reflection. And reflection could be louder than any noise the world could make. Weeks passed since the final revelation. The lies had burned out. The truth had survived. And yet, neither she nor Keanu felt victorious. There was no victory in surviving a storm that should never have been created. There was only stillness and the weight of having stayed kind when cruelty would have been easier. Hollywood moved on quickly. New scandals replaced old ones, fresh gossip filled screens, and the city's appetite for chaos continued. But for once, the two names that had been dragged through every headline now floated quietly above it all, untouched, unbothered, unbroken. Sandra sat in her home office one early morning, sunlight spilling softly across a pile of handwritten letters that had arrived from around the world. People from every corner, students, single mothers, teachers, veterans, actors, had written about how her story had changed something inside them. One letter read, "You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness, it's armor." Another said, "When he defended you, it wasn't about Hollywood. It was about every person who's ever been silent when they deserved respect." She read each letter slowly, tears forming quietly in her eyes. There was no fame in these words, no spotlight, just gratitude. Something real, and in that moment she realized that maybe that was what survival meant. Not staying visible, but staying true. Meanwhile, Keanu had retreated into what he always valued most, simplicity. He spent his days away from the city, working on a quiet, independent project about forgiveness, funding it himself with no publicity. When Thomas visited to check on him, he found him sanding the frame of an old chair, sleeves rolled up, music playing low in the background. You could have made millions doing interviews, Thomas said. Keanu smiled faintly. Money doesn't clean the soul. You've become a symbol now, you know, Thomas said. People call what you did the quiet resistance. That's not resistance, Keanu replied softly. That's just humanity. People forgot what it looked like. Thomas watched him for a moment, then asked, And what about Sandra? Keanu paused, setting the sandpaper down. She's stronger now. We both are. We learned that sometimes the world needs to break you just to see what you're made of. A few days later, Sandra received a letter, handwritten, folded carefully with no return address. Inside, in neat ink, were 4 words. You reminded me too. There was no signature, but she knew the handwriting. She smiled, holding the letter close. For years, she and Keanu had lived parallel lives, crossing paths only when fate required it, never forced, never scripted. Their connection had never needed to be defined by romance or rumor. It was something rarer, a bond forged in truth, protected by respect. Months passed. The noise faded further. Richard Hale's disappearance became one of Hollywood's whispered mysteries, but no one cared to chase it anymore. The industry had learned its lesson. Some stories end when their cruelty outlives their audience. One crisp autumn evening, Sandra was invited to give a talk at a university. She almost declined, tired of the spotlight. But something inside her whispered that she needed to go. The auditorium was filled with young filmmakers, actors and students of psychology and art. She stood on the stage, dressed simply, her voice soft but steady. People think silence is absence, she began. But silence is presence. It's what happens when you stop shouting long enough to hear what matters, she paused, looking at the young faces watching her with quiet awe. We live in a world where outrage sells faster than empathy, she continued, where being kind is seen as naive. But let me tell you something, humility lasts longer than headlines. The room stayed utterly still. Not even the sound of a phone could be heard. Years ago, she said, her tone warming, someone once stood up for me, not because he had to, but because he refused to watch dignity be destroyed for entertainment. That moment taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just says, enough, she smiled softly. If you ever find yourself in a position to protect someone, not their fame, not their image, but their humanity, do it. Because someday, someone will need to protect yours. The applause was long and sincere. There were no flashing cameras, no dramatic headlines, just respect. The kind that can only be earned through pain and grace. Later that night, after the event, she sat outside beneath the fading glow of campus lights. She scrolled through her phone and found an old picture, one from years ago. She and Keanu on the set of their first movie together. Both smiling, both young, both unaware of the storms that time would bring. She sent the photo to him with a message. Still grateful for that day you spoke when I couldn't. Minutes later, his reply came, still grateful that you listened, and just like that, there was peace again. A few months later, Keanu invited her to visit the small independent set he was working on. It was a simple film about silence, loss, and healing. When she arrived, there were no trailers, no chaos, just a few cameras and a small crew working with quiet purpose. As the sun dipped behind the hills, she stood beside him watching a scene unfold. A young actor, trembling, stood up to a powerful producer in the script, his voice calm, his message clear. When the director called cut, Sandra turned to Keanu and said, You're making our story again, aren't you? He smiled faintly. No, he said. I'm making everyone's. She looked out at the horizon. The light was golden, the air still. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't in years. Closure. Not the kind that ends stories, but the kind that gives them meaning. The film released quietly months later. No marketing, no red carpets. It was titled Beyond the Noise. It spread slowly, like a whisper carried on the wind. Critics called it the most honest film of the decade. Others called it a lesson in restraint. And somewhere deep inside its final scene, as the camera panned to a silent figure walking into dawn, A familiar voice narrated softly, "The world will always speak, but what defines you isn't what they say, it's what you choose to say back." Years later, when people looked back on that strange chapter of Hollywood, the interviews, the storm, the viral chaos, they didn't talk about the lies anymore. They talked about the moment Keanu Reeves told a reporter to stop. They talked about how he defended a friend with calmness instead of anger, how his words turned a scandal into a lesson, how Sandra Bullock faced cruelty with grace instead of bitterness. And over time, their story stopped being just theirs. It became a symbol, a reminder that in a world that worships noise, two people taught everyone the quiet power of truth. On a quiet afternoon years later, Sandra sat in her garden reading, sunlight filtering through leaves. She looked up as a breeze carried a faint sound, motorcycle tires on gravel. She smiled instantly, knowing the sound by heart. Keanu parked near the gate and walked in, carrying a small box. "For you," he said. She opened it. Inside was a small notebook filled with handwritten quotes and sketches from their old movies together. On the first page, he had written, "For every moment, silence saved us." She closed the notebook gently and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said softly, "we could have been destroyed by all this." He nodded. "We could have. But instead, we learned that truth doesn't need defenders. It just needs time." They sat together under the fading sun, not speaking much because they didn't need to. The story had been told, the pain had turned into peace, and silence, once weaponized against them, had become their greatest ally. As the light dimmed, Sandra said quietly, "You ever wonder what they'll remember us for?" Keanu smiled faintly, for staying kind, and she smiled too, whispering, "That's enough." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying their laughter into the golden distance. A reminder that some legacies aren't built from noise, but from the unshakable calm of two souls who chose truth over spectacle, grace over anger, and silence over destruction. And with that, the storm finally ended, not with applause, but with peace.